I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two until the man I was engaged to looked at me in the car and said, casually, like he was commenting on the weather, "Don't speak too much tonight. You make me look like I'm dating down." I remember blinking once, then twice, because my brain refused to process the words in the order they arrived. Dating down. Like I was a bad investment. Like I was a phase he was embarrassed to admit to. "Got it," I said. Not because I agreed, but because I was tired. Tired of defending my worth. Tired of explaining why my life mattered. Tired of shrinking myself so a man who claimed to love me could feel taller. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't turn the car around, even though every part of me knew I should have. Instead, I sat there, hands folded in my lap, staring out the window as the city lights blurred together, telling myself the same lie I'd been telling for months. Every relationship has friction. What I didn't know was that the moment he walked into that gathering, confident and polished in his tailored suit, everyone inside already knew exactly what he'd said to me. And when he realized what they were talking about, when the whispers stopped and the room went quiet, he almost fainted. My name is Lena. I'm 29 years old, and I spent 3 years loving a man who believed I wasn't good enough to be seen with in public. This is the story of the night my fiancé told me to stay quiet so I wouldn't embarrass him, and how that request detonated his carefully constructed world in the most spectacular way possible. I met Ethan when we were both 26. He worked in corporate law, came from money, carried himself with the kind of ease that made people assume he belonged everywhere he stood. I was a high school history teacher. Not glamorous, not wealthy, but deeply in love with what I did. At first, he said he admired that about me, said I was grounded. Looking back, I think he meant I was beneath him. For a while, it worked. We laughed, we connected, we felt like proof that two people from different worlds could meet in the middle. Until one day, without raising his voice, without even sounding angry, he told me exactly where he thought I belonged, quiet, smiling out of the way. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. Before Ethan ever made me feel small, before words like dating down lodged themselves in my chest like shrapnel, there was a version of us that felt real. Or at least it felt real to me. I was 26, freshly settled into my third year of teaching, still riding that strange mix of exhaustion and purpose that comes from loving a job that doesn't love you back in obvious ways. My days were filled with lesson plans, teenagers testing boundaries, and the quiet, private victories of watching a student finally understand something they'd been struggling with. I didn't make much money, but I went home every night knowing I mattered to someone. Ethan entered my life at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He arrived late, confident, apologetic in that charming way that made people forgive him before he even finished speaking. He wore a tailored jacket, spoke easily about his work, and had the kind of laugh that made you feel like you'd just said something genuinely clever. When he asked what I did, I braced myself out of habit. People always reacted one of two ways to high school history teacher, either polite disinterest or forced admiration. Ethan surprised me. "That's impressive," he said, leaning in. "I don't think I'd have the patience for that." I laughed. "Most people don't." He said he liked that I wasn't chasing status, that I seemed grounded, that I didn't talk about my job like it was a competition. At the time, it felt like appreciation. It felt like he saw something valuable in me that others overlooked. Our early months were easy. We went on long walks after dinner, talked about books and politics, and the strange paths people take to end up where they are. He took me to restaurants I couldn't normally afford. I took him to hole-in-the-wall places near my school where the food was cheap and the stories were better. He met my friends first. They liked him immediately. He was attentive, respectful, asked questions. He remembered details. When he met my parents, he brought wine and spoke carefully, like he understood the weight of first impressions. Meeting his family was different. Not hostile, just measured. His mother was polite but reserved. His sister smiled but observed. Conversations flowed easily when Ethan talked about his cases, his firm, his future. When I spoke, people listened, nodded, then gently redirected the discussion elsewhere. I told myself I was being insecure, that it was all in my head. The first year of our relationship felt solid. We had chemistry. We laughed easily. We seemed, on the surface, compatible despite our differences. When he proposed after 2 years, I cried. Not because it was extravagant, it wasn't, but because I believed we had built something real. What I didn't notice, or didn't want to notice, were the small shifts that began around month 18. Comments disguised as jokes. Are you really wearing that to the event? You're going to tell the field trip story again? Maybe just say you work in education. It sounds more versatile. At first, I brushed them off. Everyone has friction. Everyone adjusts. Relationships are about compromise, right? Except the adjustments were always mine. He started correcting me mid-sentence at gatherings, answering questions directed at me, steering conversations away from my work, physically positioning himself between me and others like a polite barrier. I told myself he was just navigating his world, that corporate spaces were different, that I needed to adapt. What I didn't realize was that, slowly, quietly, I was learning how to disappear. I loved him, or at least I loved the version of him I met at that birthday dinner. The man who said my work mattered, the man who told me I was refreshing. I didn't yet understand that to Ethan, refreshing meant temporary. And by the time I did, I was already engaged to a man who was preparing me for a life spent standing just slightly out of frame. The problem with slow damage is that it never announces itself. It doesn't crash through your life in one dramatic moment. It seeps in quietly, convincing you to adapt until you don't recognize the shape you've taken. By the time I realized something was wrong with Ethan and me, it had already been wrong for a long time. It started with how he talked about my job when other people were around. Never directly insulting. Never cruel enough to justify a fight. Just edited. When someone asked what I did, he'd answer before I could. Lena works in education. Not teaches. Not high school history teacher. Just a vague category, smoothed over like an inconvenient detail. If I tried to clarify, he'd smile and steer the conversation somewhere safer. Real estate, politics, someone else's promotion, anything that didn't involve me explaining why a room full of teenagers could drain you and fulfill you in the same breath. At home, the comments sharpened. You're really content staying where you are? Have you ever thought about something more scalable? I just don't want people to misunderstand your ambition. Ambition. That word became his favorite weapon. It sounded neutral, reasonable, concerned, but it always landed the same way, with me feeling like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. His friends didn't help. They were polite, but conversations felt transactional. They spoke in acronyms and milestones, bonuses, titles, exit strategies. When I talked about my students, their eyes glazed over, not out of cruelty, but indifference. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. He started prepping me before events. Maybe don't tell the field trip story tonight. Let me handle most of the talking. Smile, nod, but don't volunteer too much. The worst part was how reasonable he made it sound, like he was protecting us, like he was teaching me how to survive in his world. I remember one dinner where I started telling a story about a student who'd written me a thank you note after finally passing his exam. I was mid-sentence when Ethan gently placed his hand on my knee under the table. A warning. I stopped talking without finishing the story. That was the night I realized my voice had become optional. I tried to talk to him about it once, just once. I feel like you're embarrassed by me, I said carefully, sitting across from him on our couch. He laughed softly. That's dramatic. I'm serious. Lena, you're just sensitive. I'm trying to help you navigate spaces you're not used to. That's partnership. Partnership, another word that sounded better than it felt. I started watching myself at gatherings the way you watch a stranger, monitoring my tone, editing my stories, measuring every sentence before letting it leave my mouth. I laughed less. I spoke less. I existed less. And still, it wasn't enough. 2 weeks before everything collapsed, we received an invitation to a cocktail party at one of Ethan's colleagues' penthouses. Networking, young professionals, the kind of event where careers were currency. I bought a new dress, nothing flashy, just polished enough to belong. On the drive over, city lights streaking past the windows, Ethan glanced at me like he'd been rehearsing something. Quick thing, he said. Don't speak too much tonight. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. When he explained why, when he finally said the words out loud, I felt something in me shift. Not break, not explode. Just settle. Because in that moment, everything I'd been denying finally lined up. And I understood that I wasn't imagining things. I was engaged to a man who believed loving me came with conditions. The car was quiet after he said it. Not the comfortable kind of silence we used to share on late-night drives, but the thick, pressurized kind that makes your ears ring. I watched the city slide past my window, neon signs blurring into streaks of light, while my heart thudded in a way that felt almost physical, like it was trying to escape my chest. "Don't speak too much tonight," Ethan repeated, softer this time, like he was explaining something to a child. "Just let me handle most of the talking, especially if people ask what you do." I turned to him. "Why?" He sighed, not angrily, not impatiently, just tired, like I was the problem he'd been managing all day. "Because you make me look like I'm dating down." The words landed with a strange clarity. No echo, no distortion, just clean impact. "I know that sounds harsh," he added quickly, eyes still on the road, "but these people judge based on careers and connections. When you start talking about your classroom or your students, they tune out. It reflects poorly on me." I stared at him, searching his face for hesitation, for regret, for anything that suggested he didn't mean it. "Dating down," I repeated. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" He hesitated for half a second. Then he said it. "I mean, you're not in their league professionally. That's just reality." Reality. As if he were stating a universal law instead of revealing how little he thought of me. "So tonight," he continued, "just smile, nod. Don't volunteer information." I should have told him to pull over. Should have said if he was embarrassed by me, he shouldn't be marrying me. Should have demanded better. Instead, exhaustion won. "Okay," I said quietly. "Got it." We arrived at the penthouse just before 8. Glass walls, city views, people dressed like confidence was a uniform. Ethan slipped seamlessly into the room, greeting colleagues, shaking hands, smiling wide. I stood beside him, exactly where he positioned me, like an accessory he didn't want to explain. When someone asked what I did, he answered for me. "Lena works in education." Then he changed the subject. Around 9, I drifted toward the bar, suddenly desperate for space. That's when one of Ethan's colleagues approached me. Daniel, a partner at his firm. I'd met him before. He'd always been kind, normal. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. He studied my face for a moment. "Listen, I just wanted to say, what you do matters. Teaching high school takes patience most of us don't have. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." My throat tightened. "Did Ethan say something?" Daniel hesitated. "He mentioned you'd be here, made a comment about how you're different from his usual crowd. The way he said it didn't sit right with me." I swallowed. "He told me not to talk tonight so I wouldn't embarrass him." Daniel's expression hardened. "That's messed up. You know that, right?" "I'm starting to." We talked for 10 minutes. Real conversation. He asked about my students. Listened. Actually listened. It was the first time all night I felt like a person. When Ethan found me, his jaw tightened. "I've been looking for you," he said. "Why are you talking to Daniel?" He asked me a question. "Well, wrap it up. We're leaving soon." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake replaying his words. Dating down. Like I was something he'd settled for, something he had to manage so it didn't damage his image. By morning, the decision had already been made. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. The morning after the party, the apartment felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I did. The walls were the same. The furniture sat exactly where we'd placed it together. Ethan's shoes were by the door, his watch on the counter, his life still arranged neatly around mine. But something inside me had gone still. I moved through the kitchen on autopilot, pouring coffee I didn't want, staring out the window without seeing anything. My body felt heavy, like it was carrying news my mind hadn't fully processed yet. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was numb. Ethan had already left for work. No goodbye kiss, no text, just absence. I kept hearing his voice in my head, calm and reasonable, explaining why I needed to be quieter, smaller, easier to display. It reflects poorly on me. I sat at the table and tried to make sense of my own reaction. Why hadn't I fought back? Why had I agreed so easily? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity, because this wasn't the first time. It was just the first time he'd said it without wrapping it in politeness. I thought back over the last year and a half. The jokes that weren't jokes. The corrections. The way he'd steer conversations away from me. The way I'd started asking myself before speaking, is this impressive enough to say out loud? I'd been slowly learning how to erase myself. Around noon, I did something I'd never done before. I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "Lena, everything okay?" "I need to ask you something," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. That comment Ethan made about me being different from his usual crowd. What exactly did he say? There was a pause, a long one. "Are you sure you want to know?" "Yes," he exhaled. "He said you're nice, but not ambitious." That you're content teaching high school while the rest of us are building real careers. That he worries people will think less of him for dating someone so ordinary. Ordinary. The word hit harder than dating down, because it stripped me of everything I knew to be true about myself. My work, my effort, my purpose. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. I'm sorry, he replied. You deserve better than that. After we hung up, I sat alone in the apartment for a long time. Then I started looking through our shared life with new eyes. Our photos, our social media, our history. I noticed things I'd never allowed myself to notice before. I was barely in his posts. When I was cropped to the edge, tagged without being shown. He'd curated an image of himself as successful, independent, polished, with me as an optional footnote. A girlfriend who didn't quite fit the aesthetic. I opened a blank text message addressed to his close friends and family, started typing, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. This wasn't something that could be handled through a screen. This wasn't a misunderstanding to be smoothed over. This needed air, witnesses, truth spoken before it could be rewritten. That's when I thought of his mother, Margaret. She'd always been kind to me. We'd shared coffee, talked about books, current events, life. She was hosting a small dinner that Friday. Family, close friends. Ethan and I were both invited. I picked up the phone. Lena, how are you, dear? She said warmly. I'm okay, I replied. Listen, about Friday's dinner. Would it be all right if I arrived an hour early? I'd like to help with setup. Oh, that's sweet, she laughed. Unnecessary, but if you insist. I insist. She agreed, unaware that I wasn't coming early to set the table. I was coming early to tell the truth. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't asking permission to exist. I was preparing to speak. Friday arrived faster than I expected. By the time I pulled up to Margaret's house, my hands were steady in a way that surprised me. I wasn't calm because this was easy. I was calm because the decision had already been made. There was no more debate inside me, no more bargaining with myself about whether I was being dramatic or unfair. I knew what I was walking into, and I knew why. I rang the doorbell at exactly 5. Margaret opened the door with a warm smile. You didn't have to be this punctual. I wanted to, I said, and meant it. Inside, the house smelled like roasted vegetables and herbs. Soft music played in the background. Normalcy everywhere. It felt almost surreal, knowing what I was about to introduce into this space. We worked side by side in the kitchen, setting the table, arranging plates, making small talk. She told me about a book she was reading. I responded automatically, but my attention was split, counting down the minutes until I couldn't delay it anymore. Around 5:30, when the house was still quiet and the food was nearly ready, I stopped moving. Margaret, I said. She looked up from the cutting board. Yes, dear? I need to tell you something about Ethan and me. Her smile faded instantly. Is everything all right? No, I said gently. It's not. I told her everything. Not dramatically, not angrily, just fact by fact. The comments, the party, the words dating down, the way he'd been embarrassed by my job, by who I was. At first, she shook her head. That doesn't sound like him. I know, I said. He's careful with how he presents things, but this has been building for a long time. I watched her face change as the pattern formed. Confusion gave way to concern to something closer to grief. He really said that to you? She asked quietly. Yes. She set the knife down. I had no idea. I know, I said. That's why I'm telling you now. I'm ending the engagement tonight, but I didn't want him to have the chance to explain it away. I wanted you to hear it from me first. She stepped toward me and hugged me without hesitation. Tight, protective. I'm so sorry, she said. That's not how he was raised. I believe you, I replied, but I can't stay with someone who thinks I'm beneath him. She pulled back, studying my face. What do you want to do? I want everyone here tonight to understand why this is happening, before Ethan arrives. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. You mean, tell them? Yes. She considered it for a moment. That's bold. He humiliated me privately, I said. I think it's fair he faces the truth publicly. She nodded slowly. I support you. By 6, everyone had arrived except Ethan. His sister Rachel, her husband Mark, Margaret's close friend Linda, and 2 family friends were gathered in the living room with drinks in hand. Laughter filled the room. Unaware of what was about to interrupt it, Margaret caught my eye and gave a small nod. Everyone, she said, voice steady. Lena has something she'd like to share before Ethan gets here. The room went silent. I took a breath. I'm ending my engagement to Ethan tonight, I said. Rachel's glass froze halfway to her lips. What? Why? Someone asked. Because he's ashamed of me, I replied. 2 weeks ago, he told me not to speak at a work event because I make him look like he's dating down. The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. I didn't stop there. I laid out the pattern, the comments, the way he'd minimize my work, the way he'd edited me out of his life when it suited his image. I'm a high school history teacher, I said. I love my job. I'm good at it. But that's not enough for him. The reactions came slowly. Shock, disbelief, unease. I've noticed he does that, Rachel said quietly. Changes the subject when you talk about school. Margaret confirmed what she'd seen on social media, how I was barely present. By the time the front door opened at 6:30, the truth was already fully in the room. Ethan walked in smiling, polished, confident. And then he saw our faces. The silence told him everything. Ethan stopped just inside the doorway. His smile lingered for half a second too long, like a reflex his body hadn't caught up with yet. Then he noticed the room, the stillness, the way no one moved to greet him, the way every pair of eyes was already waiting. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing at his mother. Margaret didn't answer immediately. She looked at him the way a parent does when they already know the truth and are bracing for confirmation. "Lena told us what you said to her," she said finally, "about her being beneath you." His face drained of color, then flushed red so fast it was almost painful to watch. He turned to me. "You told them?" he said. "That was private." "You made a judgment about my worth," I replied calmly. "I'm making a statement about ending this relationship." "You're exaggerating," he said quickly, looking around the room. "She's twisting my words." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt. I just waited. "Lena gave us specifics," Rachel said. "Multiple examples. This doesn't sound like a misunderstanding." Ethan laughed, sharp and defensive. "I was trying to help her navigate my professional world." "By telling her to stay quiet so she wouldn't embarrass you?" I asked. "I didn't say it like that." "You said I make you look like you're dating down," I replied. "Those were your exact words." He turned to his mother. "Mom, you can't seriously believe her over me." Margaret's voice was steady. "I believe her because she has no reason to lie, and because, if I'm honest, I've seen glimpses of this behavior. I just didn't want to acknowledge it." The room stayed quiet. No one rushed to his defense. No one filled the space for him. That's when something in Ethan snapped. "I was going to end this anyway," he said, voice shaking now. "She's right. She's not enough. She'll never be enough. I was just waiting for the right time." The words hit me harder than everything else combined. Not because they were new, but because they were final. "You humiliated me for years," he continued, anger rising. "You ambushed me in front of my own family." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something unexpected. Relief. "I gave you one evening of accountability," I said. "You gave me years of disrespect." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan grabbed his jacket. "This is over," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He left without eating, without saying goodbye. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt definitive. I stayed. Dinner was awkward, but strangely grounding. People apologized for not seeing the signs, for not speaking up sooner. Rachel admitted she'd noticed things, but convinced herself she was imagining them. Afterward, Margaret pulled me aside. "You're welcome here any time," she said, "with or without him. I'm proud of how you handled tonight." I nodded, but when I got home later, alone in the apartment we'd shared, the adrenaline faded. That's when it hit. The grief, the exhaustion, the realization that 3 years of my life had ended in one evening. I sat on the floor, back against the couch, and let myself feel it. Not just the loss of him, but the loss of the version of myself I'd bent into shape for his comfort. That night I touched the lowest point of the story, not because he left, but because I finally understood how much of myself I'd given up just to be tolerated. And once you see that clearly, there's no going back. The shift didn't come with fireworks. It came with clarity. The days after that dinner passed in a strange, weightless blur. Ethan sent a few messages at first, some defensive, some half apologetic. None of them acknowledged the core truth. He never said he was wrong. He never said he'd disrespected me. He only spoke about how things looked, how the situation affected him, how he hadn't meant for it to blow up like that. I didn't reply. Silence, I learned, is different when it's chosen. Margaret checked in on me 2 days later. Then Rachel. Then one of Ethan's family friends who'd been at the dinner. Each conversation reinforced the same thing. The story wasn't being twisted. The truth had landed exactly where it needed to. The real turning point came a week later. Daniel called me again. "I wanted you to hear this directly," he said. "People are talking, not in a gossip way, in a reevaluating way. I listened quietly as he explained how some of Ethan's colleagues had started connecting dots, how his comment about me being ordinary didn't sit right once people realized what he'd actually meant, how the image he'd carefully maintained had developed hairline cracks. He's not ruined, Daniel added, but people see him differently now, less polished, less impressive. I thanked him and hung up, not feeling triumphant, just finished. That night, I walked through the apartment and started separating my life from his, not angrily, methodically. Clothes, books, photos. I noticed how little of the space actually felt like mine, and for the first time, I didn't blame myself for that. I stood in front of the mirror and really looked at myself. A woman who loved her work, a woman who showed up for others, a woman who had been taught, slowly and subtly, that none of that counted. I realized something then, so clear it almost startled me. He didn't choose me, despite my ordinariness. He chose me because he thought I'd accept being diminished. And I didn't anymore. The engagement ring sat on the counter exactly where I'd placed it the night I came home. I didn't throw it. I didn't cry over it. I simply slid it into its box and set it by the door, ready for him to collect. That was the moment I knew the power had shifted, not because he'd lost something, but because I'd found myself again. The aftermath didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded quietly, like a slow ripple spreading outward from a single, undeniable truth. Ethan never came to pick up the ring in person. He texted, short and formal, asking if he could send a courier. I agreed. When the door closed behind the delivery driver, I felt nothing dramatic. No shaking hands, no tears. Just a clean, final punctuation mark on something that had already ended emotionally long before it ended officially. What surprised me wasn't how fast he disappeared from my daily life. It was how quickly everything else rearranged itself once he did. Within days, people started reaching out. Not to gossip, to check in. Friends I hadn't seen much of during the last year invited me out. Colleagues from school noticed the change in me before I said a word. One of them pulled me aside after a faculty meeting and said, "You look lighter, like you're breathing again." Ethan, meanwhile, struggled to control the narrative. He posted vague messages online, quotes about betrayal, about being misunderstood, about people revealing their true colors, the kind of posts designed to gather sympathy without saying anything concrete. But this time the silence didn't protect him. Margaret corrected people gently when they asked. Rachel was more direct. Daniel, without malice, told the truth when it came up at work. The story spread, not dramatically, but consistently. Ethan wasn't exposed as a villain. He was exposed as something far more damaging to his image. Small. People began noticing how often he measured worth in titles, how he talked over others, how his charm thinned the moment someone didn't serve his sense of importance. His reputation didn't collapse. It cracked. And cracks are enough. 3 months passed. I heard through Rachel that Ethan was dating someone new, another lawyer, someone who fit seamlessly into his world, someone who didn't need editing. I felt no jealousy, only a quiet hope that she never learns how conditional his approval can be. Margaret and I still met for coffee occasionally. She apologized more than once for not intervening sooner. Each time, I told her the same thing. It wasn't your responsibility to fix him. She nodded, and I could see the weight of that truth settling in her too. I kept teaching, kept laughing with my students, kept going to gatherings where I didn't have to rehearse my silence in the car beforehand, where I could tell my stories without watching someone's face for disapproval. One evening, at a small dinner with friends, I realized something almost startling. I was talking, a lot, and no one was embarrassed. The night Ethan walked into his mother's house and realized everyone already knew what he'd said about me. That was the first time he faced consequences for treating someone like they were less than him. He spent 3 years making me feel small. In one evening, he finally understood what that felt like, and I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. It's been 3 months since that night. 3 months since I stopped shrinking my voice to make someone else comfortable. 3 months since I realized love was never supposed to feel like a performance review. Ethan and I haven't spoken directly. He sent a few messages early on, some apologetic, some defensive. None of them took responsibility in the way that actually matters. I didn't respond. Eventually, he stopped trying. And something unexpected happened in the quiet that followed. I started hearing myself again. Not the edited version, not the careful, curated one. The real one. The woman who talks about her students with pride. Who laughs too loudly when something is funny. who doesn't apologize for finding meaning in work that doesn't come with prestige or applause. I'm still teaching. I still love my job. I love my students. I love the small, human moments that used to make Ethan uncomfortable because they couldn't be leveraged or displayed. I go to social events now without rehearsing what not to say, without checking someone's face to see if I've crossed an invisible line. Turns out, when you're allowed to speak freely, you're actually pretty interesting. People have asked me if I feel guilty about telling the truth in front of his family, about ambushing him. I don't. He had years to treat me with basic respect. I gave him one evening of accountability. If he wanted privacy, he should have thought about that before asking me to disappear in public. The truth is, the most damaging relationships aren't the ones that explode loudly. They're the ones that quietly convince you that your value is conditional, that your worth depends on how well you fit into someone else's image. I didn't leave because he embarrassed me. I left because I finally saw that staying would mean spending a lifetime apologizing for being exactly who I am. The night Ethan realized everyone already knew what he'd said about me, that moment almost broke him. But it rebuilt me. I don't feel triumphant. I don't feel vengeful. I feel relieved. Relieved that I chose honesty over comfort. Relieved that I stopped accepting love that came with footnotes. Relieved that the next time I walk into a room, I don't have to stay quiet to earn my place in it. And if there's one lesson I'd leave you with, it's this. If someone makes you feel like you have to shrink to be loved, they don't love you. They love the version of you that asks for less. And you were never meant to live that way.